After their wedding, the newlyweds die. The reason will shock you. Let's listen to these heart-touching stories. I promise you will cry while watching till the end. Make sure to close your eyes and feel every scene. The air vibrated with a peculiar kind of joy, a tangible energy that seemed to shimmer in the late afternoon sun. Table Mountain, stoic and majestic, watched over the Cape Winelands as if blessing the union taking place at its feet. The air, crisp and carrying the subtle scent of fynbos and the distant sea, carried whispers of laughter and hushed congratulations. This was a day of beginnings, a day woven from the threads of a love story that had spanned lifetimes. Zaina, radiant in a gown of ivory silk and intricate beadwork, stood poised at the edge of the sprawling vineyard, her hand resting lightly on her father's arm. Her heart, a restless bird against her ribs, beat a rhythm of anticipation, excitement, and a touch of disbelief. This was it. This was the moment she had dreamed of since she was a little girl, braiding daisies into Jabari's hair in the sprawling gardens of their childhood homes. Her father, Raphael, squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance amidst the flurry of activities surrounding them. He looked at her, his eyes a complex mix of pride and bittersweet melancholy. He knew, as only a father could, that he was about to relinquish his role as her protector, entrusting her to another. He offered her a small, reassuring smile, and Zaina returned it, a silent promise that she would carry his love and wisdom with her into this new chapter. Jabari, standing at the far end of the aisle beneath a canopy of white roses, felt a tightness in his chest. He wasn't a man prone to sentimentality, his architect's mind was always grounded in practicality and precision. But at this moment, surrounded by the beauty of the vineyards, the warmth of the setting sun, and the expectant faces of their loved ones, he felt the immensity of what they were about to embark on. A lifetime. A promise. A future built on the bedrock of a love that had defied time and circumstance. Their story wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow burn, a gentle unfolding of a bond that had begun in the sandbox and deepened over shared laughter, whispered secrets, and the quiet comfort of knowing someone saw you, truly saw you, for who you were. They were two halves of a whole, their differences complementing rather than clashing. Jabari, steady and logical, is the anchor to Zaina's impulsive, creative spirit. Zaina, the vibrant flame that ignited Jabari's quiet intensity, pushed him to reach beyond the confines of his comfort zone. They had navigated the turbulent waters of adolescence together, their friendship evolving into something deeper, something unspoken yet undeniable. They had supported each other's dreams, celebrating each other's victories and offering solace in moments of defeat. They had built a foundation of trust and understanding that was as solid as the earth beneath their feet. The music swelled, a cascade of strings and piano that echoed the emotions swirling within them. Zaina took a deep breath, the scent of roses filling her lungs, and began her walk down the aisle. As she moved closer to Jabari, the world around her faded, the sea of faces blurring into a single point of focus. His eyes, dark and intense, held a depth of emotion that mirrored her own. At that moment, time ceased to exist. There was only him, and her, and the promise of forever. The ceremony was a blur of heartfelt vows, exchanged rings, and the quiet joy of witnessing two souls unite. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and the world erupted in applause. Jabari, his heart pounding against his ribs, pulled Zaina into his arms, their kiss sealing the promise they had just made. This was it. They were finally Mr. and Mrs. Diop. The reception, held in a grand marquee overlooking the vineyards, was a celebration of their love, their families, and the vibrant tapestry of their South African heritage. Laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses filled the air. Speeches were given, tears were shed, and stories were shared, each one a testament to the enduring bond between Zaina and Jabari. Raphael, his face beaming with pride, stood at the podium, his voice thick with emotion. He spoke of watching their love blossom, of the quiet understanding they shared, and the unwavering support they had given each other throughout their lives. He raised his glass, his eyes glistening, to Zaina and Jabari, "May your love continue to shine as brightly as the African sun." The crowd erupted in cheers, and as the applause died down, Raphael continued, a mischievous glint in his eye. Now, I know these two are eager to start their honeymoon, and I wanted to give them a send-off they'll never forget." He gestured towards the open doors of the marquee, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Parked on the lawn, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, was a sleek, black helicopter, its rotor blades glinting in the fading light. A collective murmur of excitement filled the air. This was Raphael, always extravagant, always pushing the boundaries of what was expected. Zaina and Jabari exchanged bewildered glances. This was a surprise, even for them. They had planned a quiet honeymoon, a secluded retreat in the African bush, a world away from the hustle and bustle of their lives. But this was an adventure. A grand, unexpected gesture that perfectly captured the spirit of their love. Raphael approached them, his eyes twinkling. "Consider it a wedding gift," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "A chance to see the world from a new perspective. Just the two of you." Zaina, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and disbelief, turned to Jabari. "What do you think?" she asked, her eyes shining. Jabari, his usual composure momentarily shaken by the unexpected gesture, grinned. "I think," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that your father might be slightly insane." Zaina laughed, the sound echoing through the marquee. "But in the best possible way," she added, taking his hand. As they made their way towards the helicopter, the crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment, the excitement palpable. This was a fairy tale ending, a perfect beginning. None of them could have imagined the nightmare that awaited them just beyond the horizon. The helicopter lifted smoothly into the air, the ground receding beneath them as they soared above the vineyards. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. Zaina, her hand clasped tightly in Jabari's, leaned against him, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and exhilaration. This was perfect. This was everything she had ever dreamed of. The pilot, a seasoned veteran with years of experience, pointed out landmarks as they flew along the coastline. Table Mountain, now dwarfed by their altitude, loomed in the distance, a silent guardian watching over their journey. The city lights twinkled below, a constellation of human activity against the darkening landscape. As they flew further out over the ocean, the air grew colder, the wind whipping through the open doors of the helicopter. Zaina shivered, and Jabari pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. "Are you cold?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "A little," she admitted, snuggling into his embrace. "But it's worth it. This is incredible." He kissed her forehead, his lips lingering against her skin. "Everything is incredible with you." They flew in comfortable silence for a while, lost in the beauty of the moment. The stars began to appear, pricking the darkening canvas of the sky. The moon, a sliver of silver against the deep blue, cast an ethereal glow on the ocean below. It was a scene of breathtaking beauty, a moment suspended in time. Then, without warning, the helicopter lurched violently. Zaina gasped, her grip tightening on Jabari's arm. The aircraft shuddered, the instruments on the control panel flickering erratically. The pilot's voice, strained and tense, crackled through the headset. "We've hit some unexpected turbulence. Hold on tight." Jabari's arms tightened around Zaina, his body a shield against the sudden violence of the air. "It's okay," he said, his voice reassuring, even though his heart was pounding against his ribs. "Just a little bump." But the turbulence didn't subside. It intensified, the helicopter bucking and swaying like a wild animal caught in a storm. The pilot fought for control, his hands gripping the controls with white-knuckle intensity. The alarms began to blare, a deafening cacophony of warning signals. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Zaina's euphoria. This wasn't just turbulence. This was something far more serious. She looked at Jabari, her eyes wide with terror. He met her gaze, his expression a mask of calm, but she could see the fear reflected in his depths. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper above the roar of the wind and the insistent wail of the alarms. Before Jabari could answer, the helicopter lurched again, this time with such force that Zaina was thrown against the side of the cabin. Pain lanced through her shoulder, and she cried out, the sound swallowed by the chaos erupting around them. The pilot's voice, now frantic, echoed through the headset. Mayday! Mayday! We're losing control. Engine failure. Preparing for emergency landing. Emergency landing. The words echoed in Zaina's mind, a chilling premonition of what was to come. They were miles out over the ocean, surrounded by nothing but darkness and the churning waves below. There was nowhere to land. Jabari pulled her back into his arms, his grip desperate. It's going to be okay, he said, his voice trembling slightly, but his words held no conviction. They both knew the truth. This wasn't going to be okay. The helicopter began to descend rapidly, spinning out of control. The world outside the windows became a blur of swirling darkness. Zaina closed her eyes, burying her face against Jabari's chest. She could feel his heart pounding against her own, a frantic rhythm against the backdrop of the impending doom. I love you, she whispered, the words a desperate plea against the encroaching darkness. I love you too, he replied, his voice choked with emotion. Always. Then, with a deafening crash, the helicopter slammed into the side of Table Mountain, the impact shattering the world into a million pieces. The world exploded into a cacophony and sensation. Metal screeched, glass shattered, and fire erupted, consuming everything in its path. Zaina's world shrunk to the confines of the mangled helicopter cabin, the air thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning fuel. Her body screamed in protest, every inch of her aching with a searing pain. Disoriented and struggling to breathe, she tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy and unresponsive. Panic clawed at her throat, choking her with its icy grip. Where was Jabari? Was he alive? The questions echoed in her mind, a desperate mantra against the deafening roar of the flames. Then, through the haze of pain and smoke, she saw him. He was slumped against the twisted metal of the helicopter seat, his body motionless, his face partially obscured by blood and soot. A wave of terror washed over her, threatening to drown her in its icy depths. Jabari, she cried out, her voice raw and ragged. Jabari. With a surge of adrenaline, she pushed herself towards him, ignoring the searing pain in her ribs and the throbbing in her head. She reached him, her trembling hands cupping his face, searching for any sign of life. His skin was cold and clammy. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and erratic. But he was alive. A flicker of hope ignited within her, a tiny flame against the overwhelming darkness. Jabari, she whispered, shaking him gently. Wake up. We have to get out of here. His eyelids fluttered open, his gaze unfocused, distant. He looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion and pain. Zaina, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. What happened? We crashed, she said, her voice trembling. But we're alive. We have to get out of here before. She didn't finish the sentence. The words hung in the air, unspoken yet understood. The fire was raging behind them, consuming the wreckage with terrifying speed. The heat was intense and unbearable. They had to move. Now. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she hauled him upright, her arms trembling under his weight. He leaned heavily against her, his body weak and unresponsive. Together, they stumbled towards the shattered remains of the helicopter door, the only escape route from the inferno. The smoke was thick and acrid, making it almost impossible to breathe. Zaina coughed, her lungs burning, her eyes streaming with tears. She could feel the heat of the flames licking at her back, a terrifying reminder of the imminent danger. They reached the door, the twisted metal groaning under their weight. Zaina pushed against it, using all her remaining strength to force it open. It gave way with a screech, revealing the dark, jagged landscape outside. The ground sloped steeply downwards, the edge of the cliff a terrifying drop into the churning ocean below. Zaina knew they couldn't stay here. The fire would reach them soon. They had to take a chance. We have to jump, she said, her voice strained. It's our only chance. Jabari looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. He knew she was right. There was no other way. He nodded, his grip tightening on her hand. Together? Together, she confirmed, her voice unwavering. Taking a deep breath, they jumped. The fall was a blur of terror and adrenaline. The wind whipped past them, the ground rushing up to meet them with terrifying speed. Zaina closed her eyes, clinging to Jabari, her body a shield against the inevitable impact. They landed with a jarring thud, the force of the impact knocking the air from their lungs. Pain exploded through Zaina's body, a searing wave that threatened to overwhelm her. She lay still for a moment, gasping for breath, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then, she heard Jabari's groan. He was lying beside her, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were closed, his face pale and drawn. "Jabari," she cried out, scrambling towards him. "Jabari, are you okay?" He groaned again, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at her, his gaze unfocused, distant. "My leg," he whispered, his voice strained with pain. I think it's broken." Zaina examined his leg, her heart sinking. It was bent at an unnatural angle, the bone protruding through the torn fabric of his trousers. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that it was badly broken. They were stranded on a narrow ledge just a few feet from the edge of the cliff. The wreckage of the helicopter burned fiercely above them, casting flickering shadows across the jagged rocks. The ocean roared below, its relentless rhythm a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Zaina knew they had to get help. But how? They were miles from civilization, trapped on a treacherous mountainside in the dead of night. Her phone was gone, lost somewhere in the wreckage. Their only hope was that someone had seen the crash and alerted the authorities. She ripped a strip of fabric from her wedding dress, using it to create a makeshift bandage for Jabari's leg. The pain was excruciating, but he didn't complain. He just gritted his teeth, his hand clutching hers with a desperate strength. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, trying to convince herself as much as him. "They'll find us. They have to." But as the hours dragged on, their hope began to dwindle. The fire above them eventually died down, leaving behind a smoldering wreckage that cast an eerie glow on the surrounding landscape. The air grew colder, the wind whipping through the thin fabric of Zaina's torn dress. Jabari shivered, his body racked with pain and exhaustion. He leaned against her, his head resting on her shoulder. "Zaina," he whispered, his voice weak and fading. I'm cold." Zaina pulled him closer, wrapping her arms around him, trying to share her body heat. She knew they were running out of time. Hypothermia was setting in. If help didn't arrive soon, she didn't want to think about it. She couldn't. She had to stay strong, or both of them. "Just hold on," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Just a little longer." But as the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, she knew, with a sickening certainty, that they weren't going to be rescued. They were alone. Trapped. And time was running out. Jabari's breathing grew shallower, his grip on her hand weakening. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. "I love you, Zaina," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "More than anything." Tears streamed down Zaina's face, blurring her vision. "I love you too, Jabari," she sobbed. Don't leave me." He smiled weakly, his eyes closing. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured. We're together." And with that, he took his last breath, his body going still in her arms. Zaina held him close, her body racked with sobs. The rising sun cast long shadows across the mountainside, illuminating the devastation around them. The wreckage of the helicopter, a twisted mass of metal and charred debris, served as a grim reminder of their shattered dreams. She didn't know how long she sat there, cradling his lifeless body, her mind numb with grief. Time seemed to lose all meaning. The world around her faded into a blur of color and sound, her only focus on the cold, unyielding reality of his death. The sound of a helicopter, distant at first, gradually grew louder, piercing the silence of the morning. Zaina looked up, a flicker of hope momentarily igniting within her. Were they being rescued? Was it too late? The helicopter circled overhead, its searchlight sweeping across the mountainside. It spotted the wreckage, then the two figures huddled on the ledge below. It descended slowly, hovering just above them, the downdraft whipping Zaina's hair around her face. A rescuer, harnessed to a rope, descended towards them. He reached Zaina, his face etched with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Zaina looked at him, her eyes blank, devoid of emotion. She gestured towards Jabari's lifeless body. He's gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The rescuer's expression softened with understanding. He checked Jabari's pulse, then gently placed a hand on Zaina's shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he said. "We'll get you out of here." They lifted her into the helicopter, her body limp and unresponsive. As they ascended, she looked back at the mountainside, at the wreckage, at the place where her dreams had crashed and burned. It was a sight she would never forget, a scar etched onto her soul. The story of Zaina and Jabari is a poignant testament to the fragility of life and the enduring power of love. While their journey together was tragically cut short, their connection remains a beacon of hope and a reminder to cherish every precious moment. Though unspoken, their story whispers a powerful truth, that love, in its purest form, transcends even death. The joy they shared, the dreams they built together, and the unwavering devotion they held for one another serve as a timeless reminder to embrace the present, for tomorrow is never guaranteed. In the face of unimaginable loss, it is the enduring power of love that ultimately triumphs, leaving a legacy that echoes far beyond the confines of a single lifetime. Their story encourages us to not only cherish the love we have, but also to live fully, embracing every moment with the same passion and intensity that Zaina and Jabari brought to their all-too-brief time together. This is their legacy, a reminder that love is the greatest gift and life is the most precious adventure. The days that followed were a blur of grief, disbelief, and the agonizing process of coming to terms with the unimaginable. The world mourned the loss of Zaina and Jabari, their love story tragically cut short. Newspapers and social media were filled with tributes, their faces gracing the covers of magazines, their story a testament to a love that had defied all odds. The funeral was a sea of faces, a testament to the lives they had touched. Family, friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had been moved by their story gathered to pay their respects. Tears flowed freely, the air thick with grief and the unspoken question, why? Raphael, his face etched with lines of grief he would never erase, stood at the podium, his voice trembling as he delivered the eulogy. He spoke of their childhood, their unwavering bond, their dreams of a future together. He spoke of their love, a love that had burned so brightly, extinguished far too soon. They were meant to be, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. They were two halves of a whole, a love story for the ages. And though their time together was tragically cut short, their love will live on in our hearts, in our memories, and the legacy they left behind. Zaina, her body still aching, her heart shattered into a million pieces, sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on the two caskets draped in white roses. She didn't hear the words of the eulogy, the hymn sung, the quiet sobs of those around her. She was lost in a world of grief, a world where Jabari's smile, his laughter, and his touch were all just memories, ghosts of a love that had been stolen from her. As the service ended, she walked towards the caskets, her steps slow and deliberate. She reached out, her trembling hand resting on the smooth wood of Jabari's casket. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer, a final goodbye to the man who had been her everything. She would carry his love with her, a beacon in the darkness, a reminder of the life they had shared, a life that had been tragically cut short, but a life that had been filled with a love that would endure, even in death.